Okay, in this video today, we are going to be ranking the top UFC pay-per-view cards of 2024. Obviously, if there were 14 of them, 14 is going to be the worst, one being the best. I'm not going to waste anybody's time. Let's just get right into it. All right, to kick us off, we have UFC 297, and that is going to be ranked number 14th. So last place. This doesn't mean that it was the worst card. Like, obviously, there were good moments about it, but it was very lackluster, very forgettable. The press conference was decent. Obviously, Strickland had his moment with the interviewer, obviously slagging on Canada, which fair enough. Obviously, the build-up as well between Dracus and Strickland was good. They had a good back and forth. Obviously, the press conference got kind of heated, so that was fun. And luckily, that then transferred into the main event. It was a great back and forth, very competitive. Some people even think Strickland won the fight. So with that, it then builds into the rematch that's going to happen. So main event, I can't really fault it. It was good. Co-main event, absolutely stinker. Like, what were we doing there? Obviously, there were some other moments, like obviously the Mike Malott mishap that happened. Obviously, it was a great fight, but obviously, he lost 15 seconds to go. But the Evloev fight was okay. And there was just like a few other, like the Sean Woodson one was all right, but there was just a lot of just very dull moments. And this is kind of where the card kind of fails, is because a lot of the fights were just meh. They were just decisions, kind of boring to watch, not really big things happening in them. And that also correlates into the fact of the Canadian fighters went 0-7. Male fighters, I should specify there. The female kind of dominated, but besides the point, the male fighters, all the prospects we had, done. So 0-7, you hate to see that. And honestly, it just turned out to be a very forgettable card apart from the main event. So for that reason, I have to rank it number 14th. UFC 307 is going to be ranked number 13. Okay, and before you get on me about why it's so low, like how could you put an Alex Pereira card so low, I'll explain. Okay, the main event carried this card. It was a great main event, good back and forth. Kilo did far better than what we thought he would do, and obviously the round 4 for Alex Pereira, absolute class. Love to see the main events. Honestly, I'd rewatch it every time if I had to. Obviously, what else happened about this card? Honestly, not much. We had the Buckley KO. That was very hype, getting us into the main card, but then all the momentum fell off. Just all of it. So it was very hard to watch this card because the pacing was horrible. Obviously, the co-main event was an absolute stinker. Obviously, the Jose Aldo Mario Batista stinker. The Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland fight, that one was a doctor stoppage, right? So that wasn't that fun to watch. And then obviously Kayla Harrison as well. So it was just all the momentum died when you got to the main card. And then obviously the main event delivered, but you cannot judge a whole pay-per-view just from one fight. You need to have multiple fights that kind of deliver. And obviously mix that with the horrible performance by Batista, like I mentioned. Obviously the wrong scorecard by Pena. And just weird reffing with the Cesar Almeida fight as well. It's just, this was a very weak card. Like, the main event was great. Like, nobody's going to say it wasn't great because it just was. And the Buckley moment happened. But apart from that, what else happened? It's just a very forgettable, very long-lasting kind of card where it was a bunch of decisions, not much action, that kind of thing. And it just wasn't that enjoyable apart from the main event. So the reason why it's not last is because you cannot put an Alex Pereira fight last. But it is very close to being last. UFC 309 is going to be ranked number 12th for me. Okay, we had a cool knockout in the main event with the spinning back kick. That was very cool to see by Jones. Obviously, the co-main event delivered. How I like to say it was the people's main event, because obviously the main event was very predictable. We had a showcase performance by Owen Elliott, who then builds up a great prospect for that division. So there were good things that came out of the UFC 309. But it was just full of controversies, and that's why it is going to be ranked low. The card felt very predictable. We had several, like 5-1 favorites, if not 10-1 favorites on the card. And it's just what this card could have been. It could have been a Jones versus Aspinall fight. But unfortunately, they honored the 40-year-old Stipe fight. Nobody kind of wanted to see that. And I guess the silver lining of this is that it does build up the Aspinall fight more, as long as Jones doesn't continue being a duck and obviously doesn't want to take that fight. But if it does happen, the Aspinall versus Jones fight will be the biggest one in the heavyweight division, in my opinion. Another flaw about this card is obviously, why is Bo Nickel on the main card again? his striking looked horrendous. And that's not to say that I hate the guy or anything like that. It's just, it killed the momentum of this card, even though we had several decisions. And it was just a very slow pacing card. So for that reason, it just felt too predictable. Like, we already kind of knew he was going to win the fights. There wasn't much action that happened apart from the main event and obviously the co-main. So for that reason, I have to rank it lower. UFC 304 is going to be ranked number 11th for me. And there are a few good things this card did. Is one, obviously the matchmaking was solid. I thought every one of these fights were well placed. I thought they obviously had title implications. They had obviously ranking implications, and I just thought they were very solid fights that were put together. Next, obviously, Tom Aspinall in the co-main event solidified himself as actually being the champion, defending his belt. Obviously, this was the interim champion, but we all know he's the real champ. And then, obviously, there were a few other moments that obviously were the highlight of this card, like Paddy Pimblett getting the submission in round 1 there. What else kind of was a big moment about this card? Owen Elliott as well got a win. Mick Parkin is now going to be a good prospect. So there were some good moments. But this card was unfortunately riddled with controversies and just bad performances. The start time, for example. Why was this card hosted at what? Like, I think it was like 4 a.m. or 12 a.m., somewhere around there. It was something early in the morning. Why does the UFC do this? But obviously when we go to Saudi Arabia, they don't change the time for them. Yeah, I mean, I wonder why. I do wonder why. Another sad moment about this card was obviously at the press conference. They tried to get the bonuses raised just like they did at UFC 300. Obviously, Dana White accepted, bent the arm a little bit. Sure, let's raise the bonuses that we're going to give out to like 100,000, and nobody fought well enough for that bonus. And then from that, he said, I'm never going to raise the bonuses again for the fighters, which kind of sucked. And it's just overall, the card felt very slow paced, even though there were finishes. It just felt like the card got dragged on, and honestly, I would blame the start time for that. And like, obviously, one of the bigger controversies of this, which obviously got a UFC fighter fired from this, was the Manel Kape and Makaev fight. Bunch of issues backstage. They were itching at each other to fight. As soon as they get in the cage, nothing happened. So that was a huge letdown. So honestly, this card did well, mainly because of the main event and co-main event. And I know I'm saying Bilal did well in this fight, but he did, honestly. Like, apart from, the main kind of 3 fights of the main card there, wasn't too much that happened, but it's still a better fight card than what we've just seen previously. So for that reason, it has to be ranked number 11th, but I cannot put it any higher. But before we continue, if you guys have made it this far in the video, please consider liking and subscribing. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers for the channel. That would be the New Year's goal, and obviously it would help out the algorithm tremendously. So if you guys can give it a like and subscribe, that would be great. I'm going to not waste any more time. Let's just get right back into it. UFC 303 is going to be ranked number 10th. Okay, this was the failed McGregor card. And just like Conor McGregor cards, they're normally very top heavy and the prelims kind of suck. And that is exactly what we saw with this card. So obviously the fights were saved because, again, it was supposed to be McGregor and Chandler. McGregor pulled out. Alex Pereira stepped in. Yuri stepped in. There was a whole kind of fiasco with the Diego Lopez fight, with Ortega pulling out. Dan Ige stepped in 4 hours as the event was taken live. And honestly, I have very good memories from this card. Watching the Ian Gary fight against my MVP, that was great to watch. Obviously, the main event, co-main event delivered. Some of the prelim fights delivered. And, overall, just a very solid card. The problem is, though, it's just the prelims themselves. So it just felt the build-up was kind of weak. And for that reason, I cannot put it any higher than number 10 because it just overall wasn't the greatest pay-per-view. It did sell well, but it was just what it could have been. And also the fact of it was just kind of like building up to the main event and co-main event. So for that reason, I have to put it number 10. UFC 305 is going to be ranked number 9 for me. Okay, now that we are actually in the top 10, there are going to be less things that are going to be wrong with these pay-per-views because obviously the whole idea of this is that they're going to get better and better, right? So obviously what this card did really well is the main card itself. So the main 5 fights were very strong, and to be honest, they all delivered. Obviously, and then there were also good build-ups and narratives going into this fight. Obviously, who's going to be the king of Africa, that kind of thing. Dricus du Plessis versus Adesanya. The co-main event, people were calling this Usyk's first title defense against his fight against Pantoja. Obviously, Dan Hooker's back. The main cards here delivered in all aspects, in my opinion. but very similar to the fight card beforehand. It's just very top heavy. If you look at the prelims, not much happened. A lot of decisions and just a lot of fighters that not many people know. And for that reason, it cannot go any higher than 9th, even though I had a great time watching this card. Obviously, we saw like Carlos Prates knockout too. That was great. It's just, it cannot go higher because it was lackluster as we were building up into the main event there. So, number 9. Okay, UFC 301 is going to be ranked number 8, and I feel like I'm going to get a decent amount of controversy with this one. I think this card was good. Okay, I'm of the opinion that I was actually quite pleased with this fight card. Obviously, we got introduced to the fighting nerds, you know, Kyle Barallo, who was the other one? Oh, Ruffy also got introduced on this card against Jamie Malarkey. That was a great fight to watch. The card started off with a bang against Costa, and honestly, the main event was decent. It was a great scrap back and forth. Obviously, like I said, Usyk almost won that fight, which is why people were calling it his first title defense against Kai Kara there. Obviously, we had the return of Jose Aldo. Michelle Pereira was in this fight card. It was just, overall, in my opinion, it was a great card. Well, not a great card. It was a decent card. But this is kind of where the card kind of falls off here. It was doomed to fail. It was coming off after UFC 300, which is known by many as being the greatest UFC event of all time. And it was also plagued with kind of a lot of decisions with this fight pay-per-view. And obviously we had that weird doctor stoppage with the Jack Shore fight too. So I can get why people don't like it as much. And obviously considering what we had just before this event, I get it. But in my opinion, the fights were actually decent. And in my opinion, it held up to what it was. But I think it was just overshadowed by the fact of it was just doomed to fail. UFC 302 is going to be ranked number 7. And the reason being for this, okay, is I actually thought it was a very decent card here. The main event delivered. Dustin Poirier put on an absolute show. Islam's striking looked better. Poirier's wrestling improved. It all kind of justified itself in a sense, because obviously the main event was controversial about why Poirier even getting the title shot itself. I'm thankful that it did happen, because obviously we did see a great fight, but you know, there is obviously that controversy there. The co-main event, kind of undelivered in a sense, apart from the last kind of 15 seconds, you know, because we had Sean Strickland in the press conference saying, hey, I'm gonna go to war for you guys, and then jabbed and teeped his way to a decision. So it was just one of those things where it just could have been a better fight, but I'm so happy that it happened. And honestly, the rest of the fights, it was great matchmaking. You know, all the fights were kind of catered to either one guy, but it didn't really feel too predictable. It was a great scrap for most of them. So the matchmaking on this card was great. But the reason why I cannot put it any higher is because on the prelims themselves, there were 7 of them. 6 of them went to a decision. The fact that Jolton Almeida was the guy to break the curse of getting the finish just proves to you that something was wrong on this card. It was a very much a slow-paced fight, or card, sorry. And for that reason, I cannot rank it any higher. I just think the quality of it was good enough for it to be ranked number 7. UFC 310 is going to be ranked number 6, and this one should be pretty recent in your minds because it just happened. Okay, it was Alex Pantoja taking on Kaya Sakura. In my opinion, this was a solid pay-per-view as well, and that's why it's going to be ranked number 6, because there are lesser issues. There's obviously one overarching issue, which I'll get into in a second here, but the matchups were great. Obviously, the main event was controversial, but it actually delivered. Pantoja showed his dominance. Obviously, there was 3 fights to start off this card. Whenever a card starts like that, you love to see it, right? 3 finishes in a row, and obviously throughout the rest of the card, there was a bunch of finishes, decisions, submissions, so you never kind of knew what was going to happen. So the pacing felt really decent, actually. The controversies here are the orders of the fight. Like, why is Kron Gracie on the main card in 2024? We don't know. And obviously, the main problem here is the judging, okay? What happened in that Ciryl Gane and Volkov fight? What happened? Volkov definitely won that. Gane got gifted a decision win. Obviously, even he knows it. That's why he was walking out of the cage as he was getting announced the winner, because he just didn't deserve it. But besides those points there, you gotta say it was a good card, because it just was, you know, old school Luke's back. Dominic Reyes going on a title run. There was a great grappling match between Evloev and Sterling, and it just felt like a fun card to watch. So for that reason, it's got to be number 6. Okay, UFC 306 is going to be ranked in my top 5. The reason why is because it's something that we've never done before. No sporting event has ever gone to the Sphere, so it was great to see that. It was a very cool experience to even watch on the TV too. Obviously, the ticket prices were a different story, but I didn't go, so honestly, why should I care about that? Same thing with the cost of this. Like, oh, it costs 20 million. Why do I care? It's not like I have the 20 million to pay for it. So honestly, the cost wise, don't really care. So it was something cool to see. I'm glad that the UFC did it, and obviously they were able to host it in the way that they did. The main card was decent. I would say especially the early main card kind of ended with Diego Lopez, the GOAT. But glad he got his shot there. And then obviously it was cool to have 2 belts on the line as well, kind of add some more title implications. So that was very cool to see. But again, this is the reason why it's only ranked number 5, is because you cannot put it any higher because A, the press conference was dead. They had such a huge opportunity to make this actually into a cool press conference. And I get Sean O'Malley is pretty dead on the mic, Marab and all that kind of stuff, but it was just the interviewers and kind of the questions they were asking. Oh, how does it feel to be on the card of this magnitude? Well, what do you want them to say? Good? It's just dead. It's just ask better questions. Obviously, we had the Rodriguez fight that obviously turned out to be pretty hype as well. It was a great back and forth between Ode Osbourne, and obviously they kind of stole the press conference as well. But it's just like, ask better questions, man. It's just every time the UFC do this with press conferences, they ruin them because A, they're too short, and B, no questions get asked that are good. Obviously, as well, is there weren't actually that many fights on this card there. I think there were only like 11 fights. So that could have obviously been better. The graphics were cool to see, obviously, but I'm kind of disappointed that we only got to see them during the main card, and I wish they were more on the prelims as well. Like, I think it opened up like some scaffolding on the screen there, so that was kind of a little bit disappointing, but I'm glad we did get to see some of the graphics though. But that's going to be why it is going to be ranked number 5. UFC 298 is going to be ranked number 4 for me. The reason being is because the main card was actually decently good, and obviously the rest of the card as well was decent. It had solid pacing, the matchmaking was decent too. There was a few knockouts, a few submissions, a few decisions, that kind of thing, so it didn't feel like dull or boring at any time. And obviously the main card itself delivered. Like I said, the press conference was funny. Obviously we saw Old Man Volk come out. Then we also saw the heel aspect of Topuria, obviously grabbing the belt, that kind of thing. And honestly, it made a new superstar, especially because Ilia Topuria went out there and knocked out Volk the way he did. That was very impressive. Obviously, same thing. It does set up for a rematch because obviously Volk was coming off a knockout from Islam. So obviously, did that affect it, or is Ilia the best? That kind of thing. So for me, this card was decent. Is it top 3? Honestly, if his top 3 cards weren't there, then it would be number 1. Obviously, anybody, that's a stupid saying. I don't know why I said that, but you get what I'm saying. But this is why the UFC 298 has to be top 4 for me. That's right, top 3. UFC 299 is going to be in my 3rd place. The main card was just incredible. Like, let me read you out this. Sean O'Malley versus Vera. O'Malley landed one of the loudest knees you've ever heard. Dustin Poirier takes on an up-and-comer in BSD, knocks him out. MVP's debut has a wonder, like a class striking session. JDM, crazy comeback win, and then old school PDon. The main card here is incredible in my opinion, and even the prelims were good. There were great moments on there. Obviously the Gamrot fight was okay. Jolson Almeida kind of froze, that was a weird one. Phillips was decent, and obviously Michel Pereira, he looked unstoppable at this weight class yet. So honestly, this whole card was just very, very good. And you know, even the narratives were great too. It was, you know, Vera obviously got a win against O'Malley, so this was the rematch. Was it a fluke, or was it actually a deserved win? That kind of thing. Obviously, MVP getting himself into the UFC. How was that gonna look? So it's just a great card, but there is better, and that is why we're gonna go into the number 2 spot next. That's right, in my number 2 spot, we have UFC 308. I mean, this was just a great card. Like, every fight here had action. There were crazy finishes, the co-main event, the main event, the what was the other one on the main card? The Sharper fight with the spinning back elbows there. That was insane. And even the decisions. You know, go rewatch the Rebecca and Orabai fight. That was an absolute war. An absolute war. And even the Farid and Victor Hugo fight. That was a fun fight to watch. There were so many good moments with this. Solid pacing. And it's just, everything about this card was great. The only clash I have with this card is obviously the start time and how the UFC caters to Abu Dhabi and the Emirates and all that kind of stuff with this. And obviously everybody knows why, it's money, but like, it sucks that the UFC England cards have to be hosted at stupid hours in the morning because they refuse to budge in those times. It's like a little bit of favoritism, which is a little bit annoying, but at least the card was very solid. But let's get into the number one spot. Surprise, surprise, UFC 300 is number one, and I think we all know why. I think there were 12 or 13 current / former champions on this card. Insane. We had the buzzer beater knockout by Max Holloway. That was incredible to watch. Charles Oliveira arguably won his fight against Armin, which obviously title contentions there. The Wei Lee fight was actually decent. It was a nice pacer. And then we got into the main event where Alex Pereira had his meme moment against Jamal Hill. Even the Yuri fight was great. It was just, there's so many good moments, obviously, especially the Diego Lopez fight. That was great too. And it's just, there are very few things bad about this card that you can say. Obviously, the first fight of the night here was Davison Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. That is a fight night main event. And that opened up UFC 300. Obviously, there were a few criticisms with it. Like, why is Kayla Harrison on this main card? Obviously, so much history with the UFC 300, that kind of thing. And then obviously, why is Bo Nickel on the main card? Get him off. Especially after his last performance against Paul Craig. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just drop the prospect. We don't need him. So honestly, UFC 300 has to be the number one because it was just a crazy card, and I'm very glad that I was able to actually watch it and experience it. So that was obviously a new kind of form of video. I hope you guys enjoyed. So let me know what you think of it, and then obviously drop your thoughts about your rankings and stuff like that in the comments down below. And yeah, thanks for watching, and see you next time.